Hello and welcome to our Ranorex webinar, Ranorex Studio Hands-on Professional Test Solution Structures. My name is Andreas, and it's a pleasure to be your host today. Let me first start with a short introduction and a few facts. The target audience for today's webinar is supposed to be at practitioner's level, which means you should have at least a little experience of working with Ranorex Studio. Don't worry, there's no need for any preparation. The test application, as well as all the examples, are available for download from within the user guide. Be aware that this webinar is being recorded, and of course, it will be available for you offline afterwards. The duration of today's webinar will be approximately 1.5 hours. And as some of you already may know, I'm always starting with telling you what we will learn today. And in fact, the title should be not Professional Test Solution Structures. It should be somehow towards Professional Test Solution Structures, because unfortunately, there's no easy way, no straightforward, no quick, simple way of structuring test solutions. But I'll try to give you everything at hand to do that in a better way. First of all, I would like to talk a little bit about the test solution anatomy. So just to give us a common understanding of what we are talking about when we talk about a solution, a test case, a test suite, and so on and so forth. I'd like to introduce then a first set of guiding principles, which should be leading you through the design of test solutions in general. And these guiding principles will accompany us during the rest of the webinar. Then we will talk quickly about some common test requirements and their structuring. And then there will be the most important topic of today's webinar is how to transform these test settings into possible test structures. And I will introduce different layouts, basic basic architecturing models of how to structure a test. And we will discuss the pros and cons of these test structures. Then I will show you how to create and professionally manage repositories across different test solutions. And we will do the same with creating and sharing module library projects. This might be something which you have not heard before. And yes, at the end, I would like to summarize and go a little bit into detail when it comes to guiding principles referring to test structures. So I would like to show you out of our experience, we do a lot of project reviews along the year. And I would like to show you some do's and don'ts when it comes to how to go in detail when I do a test case, a smart folder and conditions and stuff like that. And at the end, hopefully, if we have time, we will have a closer look on smart reporting and documentation. I would like to show you how to pimp up your test reports and make them more meaningful, especially when you need to send them to colleagues who might not be in there in that detail as you are. Hopefully, with lots of answered questions on your site. So as you could imagine, this is a very intensive program for today. And yes, that's why I think we should start into it. So I have already prepared, let's talk about test solution anatomy. So I have prepared a little test solution which has nothing to do except helping me to explain what are we talking about. So first of all, let me take a spotlight here. So first of all, when we talk about a test solution, then we talk about the basic container. So a test solution is always the basic container. It's the name of the solution is up here. And a test solution always contains at least of one project here. And usually the default project has the same name as the solution. So a solution cannot hold anything except of a test project. And a solution may hold one or more projects. So it holds usually one project, but it can hold two or more multiple projects. So this is the first part. Each project in itself usually contains a number of important files and associated items. So for example, a usual default project always holds a test suite. A test suite in itself is the main and basic container for a test case structure. So we can see one test suite here in the middle view here. And usually the default test suite itself has the same name as the test solution and the same name as the project. So actually the test suite's name is derived from the project and not from the solution. So the green icon here indicates that this is a test solution, and you could see that the ending at the file ending is rxtst for test solution, Ranorex test solution. Usually, a project also comes with a repository. So repositories usually are bound to projects. And you also have a module group here, a default module group here, and many other files which are more or less the same as within Visual Studio projects. You also have a folder here for reports and stuff like that. But the most important things are you have usually one repository per project and one test suite per project. Usually because it can be different. Different is that one project could hold more than one test suites. So usually you have a standard or default test suite, and you could have two or more other test suites too. There was one question, isn't rxtst the ending for the test suite? Yes. Did I say something different? Hopefully not. So the ending rxtst is the ending for a Ranorex test suite file. So a test suite file always has this ending, just as rxtmg is a module group file and rxrep is a repositories file name. I'm sorry if I told something different. Thank you very much for telling me this. So coming back here, you could have two or more test suites per project, and we will discuss some solutions where this might be useful and how this can be used. So much about that. There's another thing, you always have a so-called startup project. So if we have a look here at the projects within this solution, you could see that one project is printed in bold, and this is the so-called startup project. This comes into play when you use the test sequence configuration of Ranorex. So whenever you have two or more projects within one solution, you have access to a so-called test sequence configuration where you could define one of the projects as being the startup project. So I could select project A, and the bold changes to project A, which is now the startup project of this test solution. So you could use, when it comes to the test structure itself, so the test suite structure, the test suite itself is the basic container. And I should at first hand close all of this here. And underneath, we have some structuring elements. So one of the structuring elements are test cases, and the other structuring elements are smart folders. Technically speaking, a test case is more or less the same as a smart folder. The only real difference is that a test case is the basis for the counter in the test report. So when you have a test report after your test run, then it indicates you how many test cases have been executed and which of them have been executed successfully, or which of them have been blocked and which of them have been raised an error. And test case is the only matter which counts there. Smart folders are simply not counted. And as you can see here, smart folders can be part of a test suite. So a test suite in itself cannot hold any recording or code module. It only can hold another test container, which could be a test case or a smart folder. When it comes to test cases, smart folders can be used to further structure it in a tree-wise manner. So you can use smart folders to further structure test cases. When it comes to smart folders, being part of a test suite, you could even use other test cases to further structure this basic smart folder or smart folders to do that again. So there's some kind of rule set, and this rule set can be seen in our user guide. So this is something which I would like to point out very quickly now, and I would like to show you where to find all of this. So if you step into our homepage and step through the support and the Hub Center, you come to the landing page of our user guide. And if it comes to the fundamental sections, here we have the test suite section. And here we have a chapter which is called Test Suite Test Structure. And yeah, here at the very end, down there, you have an overview of what is possible if it comes to a test suite hierarchy and what you can use to further structure and what not. So this is not of that importance here, but what I also would like to show you is, of course, that we have another very important structuring element, and this is the so-called setup and teardown section. So every test container here could hold a so-called setup and teardown area. So to add this, I right-click the test container and add a setup and add a teardown. So every test container can hold at least one setup and one teardown. So I could do that for this test case number 1, 2. So you could see we have a setup and a teardown area. These are also structuring elements, and you should use them. We will see that a little bit later. You should use the setup area to set up the setting of a test case. And the teardown area could be seen as something to clean up after a test run. So for example, the setup of a test suite could be intended to start the application under test and configure it in a way that the test can be performed afterwards. The teardown can be seen as something to, finally close the application on a test, for instance. So these two sections are quite important when it comes to a good management of test cases. Another nice detail is that the teardown sections, everything within the teardown section will be executed independent if the test case before has been aborted based on a failure. So even if you have a failure somewhere up here, the teardown, everything which is in the teardown section will be executed anyway. So that's everything about the structuring elements. And when it comes to the content, I have another test suite here, which I prepared. So I think it's this one here. Yes, it's this one here. Beside the structuring elements, of course, we have so-called recording modules and we have code modules. Recording modules are a container and they directly contain actions to be executed. These actions can be recorded or constructed, and the code modules themselves are modules which are implemented based off C# or Visual Basic.net. So you can also implement code modules. And we have a very special container. It's somehow a mixture between content or structuring elements. So we are on ourselves not quite sure what it is. It's a so-called module group. So a module group is also a kind of a container which can hold different recording or code modules. So we could group them together to module groups. So this is somehow everything about structure, content of a test case, of a test suite, and something about terms and definitions. So now we should be able to talk about the same things here. And yes, I would like to continue from here into the first guiding principles for designing test solutions. There's one question coming in. Is it possible to pass a variable to a code module? Thank you very much for these questions. We won't handle this in detail today, but yes, this is possible. Variables are a very generic concept, and they can, of course, be used in recording modules as well as in code modules and in user code functions. So you can use variables in any kind of content within Ranorex Studio. And I could show you this at the end. I have some code module here with variable. So it's quite easy and quite the same as using a variable within a recording module. Thank you very much for this question. So when it comes to the first guiding principles, let me first introduce this. The main question which we handle today is, if, for instance, we have some application and we know that we need to perform some tests here. So for example, so common tests are smoke tests and sanity tests, and then the functional UI tests. And the remaining question is always, how should I transform my test setting into a detailed architecture of my Ranorex Studio test program? So this is always the main question. And I have for you now 3 guiding principles which should us guide through all of these processes. The first one is, it sounds very easy, but all the complicated things in summary, they are easy. Keep it simple. So whenever you design something, try to make it as simple as possible and only as complicated as necessary. Always start with the simple things and grow out into the more complicated ones. The second guiding principle should be, never ever separate something which belongs together, or never ever join something which is different. Always try to keep things in their natural way, and at least always find a reason of why you separate something or join something. So whenever you try to create a new smart folder, a new test case, always ask yourself, is it really necessary to do that, or can I keep it in an easier way? And last but not least, be lazy. So to come for a big role, Bill Gates one day said, I always will choose a lazy person to do a difficult job, because a lazy person will find an easy way to do it. And being lazy in our concept means reuse whatever you can, make things reusable. So don't invent the wheel all the time. Try to reuse what you already have done. And with these 3 guiding principles, we will try to have a look on how to create a test solution architecture. Let me see if there are some questions in here. How feasible for DevOps? Do we have any plugin for Jenkins? Oh, I think the questions which are not directly within the topic of today's webinar, I won't answer them here, like Jenkins CI integration. Nedelko and Slaviso will do that for you. Thank you very much. So let's go on and let's talk about first some common test requirements, and afterwards about how to transform them into into test solutions. So when it comes to test settings, then of course each test setting has different requirements and a different implementation, and we have large test settings and we have small ones and so on and so forth. But for the sake of simplicity, I will introduce a simple test which contains at least a smoke test, a sanity test, and a functional test of an application, and we will be using the demo application. So the smoke test will be something very easy. So smoke test, if the ones of you who don't know it, these are preliminary tests. They reveal simple failures, but they are severe enough to reject anything which is to happen afterwards. So for example, we will test this demo application. You all know this demo application, and it's a software on its own, so it can be tested. And a simple smoke test would be, for example, to test if this application has been installed properly in the folder I want it to. So this would be a typical smoke test. Another smoke test would be simple. Can I start the application? So does it show up on the screen? And can I stop it? So this is examples for typical smoke. Smoke tests could be rather complex, but again, they test the basic functionality of a software. In the second step, I'll try to introduce a sanity test. So sanity tests are, you could call them surface level tests. So they help to identify dependent and missing functionalities of a software. In our case, I would like to do two types of sanity tests. So the first is I would like to verify if we are testing the correct version of our program. So in here, we have a version info, which is called version 1.2. And I would like to validate within a sanity test if this is the version 1.2. And another typical sanity test would be to check if all the graphical user interface, all the UI elements in all of these register panels are really there and can be accessed properly. So if there is an introduction panel with a submit button, if there's a test database with all of these form fields. So this would be kind of a sanity test which checks the graphical user interface. And once this is done successfully, then we could step into the functional tests. And when it comes to the functional tests themselves, which is the king class of testing, of UI testing, is then we could compare the application to its functional specifications. So for instance, if I insert something here into the database, I could check if the entry is really inserted, if the counter counts correctly, and so on and so forth. If it tests an online shop, then you could test, are the articles there? Can I choose them? Can I buy them? Is the order being sent to my internal registration system and stuff like that? So this is the king class of testing. But again, almost all the functional UI tests start with a smoke test, a simple smoke test, and a rather set up sanity test afterwards. So this is smart testing as we understand it. And this is what I will show to you today. So this test setting with these three types of tests, now I would like to transform into different architectural designs of Ranorex Studio test solutions. And yes, I would like to start with introducing three basic layouts. So I would like to show you, because funny as is, as I already told you, we do a lot of project reviews, and in very many cases, independent of the size of a project, we receive one specific type of layout. And I will tell you this afterwards. After I have introduced these layouts, I tell you which is the layout we receive in most cases. And that's why we decided to introduce other solutions too. So the first layout I would like to introduce is a solution-based transformation. So a transformation of the test setting into a test solution where the main structuring is based on solutions. The second one will be a more granularity one. It's a project-based transformation. And finally, the third one will be a test suite-based transformation. And I would like to show you what this means and what the differences are and when to choose which one before we then go into more detail. So I would say let's start with the first layout. So I have prepared these layouts. You could see that here in my output folder, in my downloads folder, I have prepared three different layouts here. So let me step into the first one. And what you could see here is this is a solution-based transformation, which simplified means we decided to create one test solution per test type. So we have one test solution for the smoke test, one test solution for the sanity test, and one test solution for the functional testing. And let's step into the smoke test, for example, and let's see Another main characteristics here is you could easily see now that we have 2 projects here for each of the sub-test types. So one project to test if the installation of my application on the test has been correct, and a second project to test if the application can be started. So almost all of the structuring has been based on the solution. And to show you what this means, I simply start this test solution now for the smoke test and show you the main characteristics of that. So what we can easily see now, so yeah, don't look at this first. Let's have a look on the test suite structure here. So first of all, we have the solution and it's intended to hold only the smoke test. And we have 2 projects here, one which checks for the installation and one which checks if the application can be started. Of course, these projects hold test suites, and if I double click this, then you could easily see that I have now 1 test suite. And within this test suite, I have 1 test case, necessarily in this case only 1. If this is a larger project with a very complicated software where you need to check for dynamic link libraries and file structures which are quite complicated, then it might be longer, but more or less we have a very smart, a very small test structure here, which is very nice, manageable, even in my context here. And we have another project which is responsible for checking the if the application can be started. I don't want to go into much detail here. This we will do at the end in the second half of today's webinar. There's one question here. Does it mean that if there are 2 projects in one solution, they can share the repository? Yes, of course they can. I will show you this after I introduce the layouts. So we have one section, one topic of our webinar will be how to share a repository. And I can tell you repositories can be shared. They can be copied and linked, but I will show you, after this topic here. So this is for the smoke test. We have another solution here for the sanity test, which I won't show you now, but the functional test, for example. So I have also 1 test solution for the functional test. And what I have done here is I have placed, let's wait before it started. So again, I have placed here, I have 1 solution for the functional test, and I have structured the different types of functional tests. So for instance, the database test, the introduction test, the upload test. So these are different tests within the functional tests. I have separated those based on projects. And within the projects, then there's different types of test suites. So again, the main structuring is not happening here within the test suite. The test suite logic is quite simple in this case because the structuring of the project has been done on a solution and project basis mainly. So this is the main characteristics of this type of structuring. And when it comes to the summary of this, then I would say one of the pros is that the structuring is shifted onto a solution and project basis, not into the test case structure itself. So the test case logic itself could be rather easy. And as a result, we receive a simple and easy to manage test suite structures. And we have an expected fast test execution because each test can be run separately and delivers separate results. The cons might be, of course, that the solution settings, that the repository sharing and management, and the modules separated in each solution need to be handled from outside. So I don't have 1 solution setting, 1 repository setting by default. I need to invest a lot of management into this. Also, one point is that I don't have a controlled test execution, so I cannot handle which test to run first and which one to run afterwards in an automated way. I only could do that by means of external scripting or within a continuous integration program. I also have separated reports, so every solution delivers its own reports, and there's no way of combining them or having them in one place together by default. And of course, there's no easy way of sharing data between test solutions. When I do the end summary, I will point out some other recommendations when to choose what. But let's first introduce the second layout now. When it comes to the second layout, it's a more project-based layout. And what you could easily see now is that we don't have different solutions, we have one solution. So we have one application to test, and we have we only have one solution where this happens. And if I step into that, then you could easily see now that we are now structuring within the solution on a project-based approach. So we have one project for the smoke test, one project for the sanity test, and one project for the functional test. And it's easy to open that. So I will open the solution and show you the difference to what we have introduced before. So let's Ranorex open up this test solution. Here we go. Again, I don't want you to watch the implementation so far. First of all, let's have a look on here on our project file path. We have one solution here for the demo application, and there we have one project for the smoke test, one for the sanity test, and one for the functional testing. And if we open up, for instance, the smoke testing, then again, the different subtypes of tests are separated in test suites. So the test suites for the smoke tests here and for the sanity tests look quite the same as they have looked before. So there's no big difference in that. But when it comes to the functional testing, which usually tends to be more complex or should give you an insight of more complex, then you could see that now the functional tests have also been, the subtests have also been separated to different test suites. And if I step into such a test suite now, you could see that the test case structure within the test suite now tends to be more complex than it has been before. So part of the test case logic is now shifted from the structure into the test suite itself, which is an opportunity, but could be a challenge in both ways. So first is now we could introduce different run configurations to handle the test case logic in here. So we use run configurations to differ between test case settings. And we have another nice opportunity now. Having two or more test suites within one project gives us the opportunity to make use of the test sequence configuration. So we could choose different starting projects here. So I could choose to perform the smoke test first, and I could choose which smoke tests to be executed in a controlled way from within Ranorex Studio. This only could happen from outside in the first approach, but this can be done inside here now. And of course, we now can share data between different types of functional tests within one test suite here. So data can be easily shared within one test suite setting here. So again, when we come to the summary of this layout here, I would say, oops, this is the wrong slide. So let's, so wrong slide. Just a second, here we go. Yes, the summary of layout B now is that all the test types of one testing are within one solution. So this gives us the opportunity that we have one solution setting, we have obviously one repository by default, one module library to handle, to manage. So you need not care about how to share and manage a repository or a module library across different solutions. We have the logical structuring on the project and the test suite basis, both. So the rough structuring is on a project basis, but the test case logic is shifted into the test case itself, into the test suite. We still have well-organized test suites because part of the structuring is done on the project basis. And yes, we could make use of a controlled test execution via test sequence and run configuration. Still, the reports are separated, and still it's no easy way of sharing data between test projects and test suites. So let's introduce the next and the last layout. It's layout C, and there you will see the difference. So let's step into layout C. Again, we only have one solution here. And if I open it up, then you can see we only have one project here. So the complete structuring of this project, of this test setting, has been shifted into one project. And you could imagine, where's the test logic of your test cases? It must be within the test suites now. Now, this type of project delivers the most complex and complicated test settings within a test suite. But let's open this solution and have a look at it. So again, I close these test suites first and would like to introduce you to the test solution structuring. So we have one solution here, and we only have one project here. So the project is called Ranorex Demo Application Testing. And all the structuring needs to be done here on a test suite basis. So we have one test suite for the smoke test, one test suite for the sanity test, and one test suite for the functional testing. When it comes, for example, to smoke testing, then it's really not a big change. So I would say simple tests stay simple, independent where you structure them. But when it comes to functional testing now, it makes a major difference, because when it comes to functional testing, all your test setting, all your test case structure has now been moved into one single test suite. And in there, if I open up if I expand all of those details in here, then you could see the test logic here within this test case setting could rather be complex. So it could be many pages, many substructures, and stuff like that. So this structuring has, of course, its pros, but it, of course, has also its cons. As a pro, you still are able to manage the different run configurations through this run configuration setting. So here now I have 8 different run configurations to control. I also could make use of my test sequence configuration here. I only have one project, so I cannot choose between a star project, but now you could choose which test suite to be included, which one not to be included, and in which run configuration a test suite should be run. So this is something which you could control here from the test sequence. But of course, you need to be aware that test case structures are tending to be much more complex than they have been before. And before we go into detail here, I really would like to make the summary on that. All the test types, let me point that out with the spotlight again, all the test types of one test setting are in one solution. That's a fact. So you have everything in one place. You only need to open one test solution and you can manage it. For small tests, they remain clean and well structured. You have still a central option of master control through test sequence and run configurations. Again, you only have one test solution. setting, one repository if you need it, or by default, or one module library to handle. And of course, you can share data within the test suite as you would like to. So if you have a requirement to share data within the test suite, it's possible here. But you should always take into account it could be rather complex. So test structures tend to be complex and overwhelming. And still, there's no way to share data between, of course, the different test suites. So data can only share between one test suite. And just to point that out at the end, in our case, this is what I have now outlined here in green. For our case, I would tend to prefer layout B or C, with a strong recommendation to go for layout B. So I always would try to keep the test case logic itself as simple, to come to the guideline, as simple as we can, and only as complex as we need it. The layout A, the solution-based layout, only makes sense when you really have different repositories, for instance. I would like to summarize this in some kind of decision basis now. So the first recommendation always should be, you always should prefer an integrated C-like layout over a separated one. And in many times you may be landing with the B. So making a rough structuring on a project basis, and then outlining the test complexity somehow into the test suite itself. Separate only on request of test complexity. So try to go from C to B to A, and not the other way around. As I told you before, 99% of our projects, even if they are large, come in C and still in C. So all the complexity is put into one single test suite, which is not the recommended way to handle it. So there are ways to go over some medium-scaled layout B. The second recommendation is always try to decide the layout on the basis of a repository rather on the test process, which simplified means if you are dealing with the same UI elements in one test setting, then there's no reason to separate those over test solutions and to have the challenge to manage a repository across test solutions. Although this is possible, it's not a recommended way. If tests share the same repository, they should share the same structure, the same solution. A further structure should only be based on the test procedure then. And the third recommendation is data sharing. Many of our users come to us and say, yes, but we need to share the data. So data needs to be shared among those different test cases. That's why we put them all in one test suite. And the data sharing, in fact, if you take a more distant look on your test cases, data sharing in the most cases is only a decision basis at first sight. If you look at it more closely, it has no real influence on the test solution structure. So almost any test setting could be solved without the data directly sharing them, meaning I'm creating some data based on the data set, and I reuse this data set any further, and so on and so forth. This is most often it's a bad design rather than a real requirement. So questions, let me have a look on it. Can you have a main project in your solution which triggers code modules from other projects in your solutions? Yes, the answer is yes, you can do that. It's a little bit complicated now, so I don't have a quick solution here at hand, but I could give you at the end a link to our user guide where we have this. I know that you want to know that now in detail, but unfortunately this is far beyond the scope of this webinar. Can you call a test sequence from command line? Yes, of course you can. This is something which I would like to show you in between before we step on here, because it's rather important for the understanding. So let's go for the layout C, and let's go for our, here we have it, the project. And every project has a so-called output directory. So this is the bin debug directory. So as I told you, Ranorex Studio is based on Visual Studio, and that's why we have an output directory which is called bin debug. And in here, you always have, yes, here we go. You always have a runtime. So the runtime has the same name as the project. It's called here rxdemowebtesting.exe, and you could call that on command line. And it has a number of different arguments. So you could select the run configuration, you could select the execution of a specific test suite, or even a specific smart folder or test case. You could influence the data set and so on and so forth. So it has a number of arguments, and everything is very well documented in our user guide, and I would like to point it out at the end of today's webinar. So far so good. Let me see what we have done so far. Yes, we've been talking about test solution anatomy, some guiding principles, and we already did some main layouts of where to transform the test setting into. And going on with that, I first would like to show you now, regarding a question of one of our users, how to create and professionally manage repositories. So this is something which is quite often asked here. So yeah, let me show this to you right in a second. So let's again go to the downloads folder. I have a prepared solution which is called my repository demonstration. And well, what a surprise, it's an empty test solution, because I wanted to show you something. So let's open up the demo application too. So here we go. So how do we create a repository in a usual way? So there's two ways of creating a repository. One way is to simply record a test case, another one is to track them. So let's go for the second one. So let's track, let's say we would like to track this, text entry field here. And what you have is immediately you have the beginning of a repository. So you have an app folder and you have a repository item. Let's go on and track a second one, like the submit button. That's the way how we handle that. So we have another here. And yes, let's go for the third one here. Let's go for the reset button. And whoopity whoop, you could see we now have a folder here. For the experts of you, this is a rooted folder, and these are 3 repository items. And what you could see at first sight is 2 things here. The first thing is we have almost nasty names here. So these are the automatically assigned names which directly come from the SPY tool. And we have some structuring which might not really be very self-explaining or something like that. And of course, we have these Ranorex path specifications. So this is usually a repository which you receive once you create it. And most of our users really keep track of their list of actions and their test structures and stuff like that, but they don't care about the repository. And I don't want to have you such a repository. Repositories tend to include hundreds of UI elements usually, and this is not the way you should do it. I show you a repository which I really love and which I have prepared now, and it's done in a way how you could do it. So I'm opening a repository which I have made as the basis of this webinar, and it's a repository which contains an almost complete set of my UI elements of this application here. And as you could see, it starts with real names and real structuring here. So what I have here compared to an automatically created repository is I have a structuring, and I can influence the structuring. So I can make simple folders just to keep all the main menu items here. I could make folders for buttons, for input fields, for labels. I can rename all these rooted folders, so to make them some kind of self-explanations. And in addition to that, I'm using the comment field here. You always should keep in mind that you don't have to do something with this repository all the time, possibly. There are times where you're not working intensively with a repository, or even worse, you need to share it with colleagues, testers, and other persons within the project team, and they even don't know what you are talking about when you talk about your repository items. And repository items should be commented. They should be named in a meaningful way. And this is especially true if you have repository items which contain variables. So sometimes a repository item is not just simple one repository item, it's a repository item which might contain a variable, and then you need to somehow comment this within the repository. So this is the recommended way of doing that. This is the first part. And now the second part is, how can I share a repository among different projects? So this is something which I would like to show you. So again, let's go for my, oh, this is the wrong solution. Let's save it and close it. So many solutions, I need to be aware of that. So let's go again into my repository demo, which I accidentally ended. Oh, we are good in time. So we have almost 1 hour, still half an hour to go. This should give me time enough to end this webinar in a good way. So if you step into my solution here, you could see I only have one solution, one project, and I have one repository here. And I have access to my repository down there. And what I could do now is I could simply open a new repository. So I could click open from disk, and now I could step into my downloads folder and select the repository which I have done. So in real large applications, you have a team or one person or a team of persons who's responsible for the repository only. And then you need to share this repository with others. So what you could do now is here, I select this master repository and click open. And now I'm asked what to do with that. So I could simply link this repository to my project. Let me point it out with the spotlight. I could link it. I could copy it. I could even embed it into my recording. So embedding a repository is a way of capsuling it with the recording itself. It's not done very often, but it's a way of doing that. And you could merge the two repositories together. So you could decide if it's still managed centrally and you make use of it, or if you copy it into your project and everything is fine. So this is something where you could share a repository among different solutions. And now I have something different for you. Just a second. Here we go. Sharing a repository is not the only thing which is most helpful when it comes to test structures, but also how to create and share module libraries. And this is something which you might not have heard of, but I would like to show it to you now. And let me open up here. I have a demo master project, a solution with a project, and let's see what I have done here. Among sharing a single repository could be one solution, but again, to keep in accordance with our guiding principle, keeping it as simple as possible, separating a repository only makes sense when you really have different graphical UI elements. So what I have here is, I have here one solution and I have two projects here. I have one demo app master project and one demo app master library project. Let's have a look at the demo app master. I have one test suite here. You can see it, it's empty. And I have a second project here, which obviously does not contain any test suite here. So we don't have a test suite in this project. But what we have here is we have a really large folder structure of different recording and code modules. So this is what we have here. So obviously, we here have a library of code modules and recording modules. And what about such a project? And you could easily add a project to a solution if you right-click here and click Add Blank Project. Then I have a template here. I have several templates for different projects. I could add a so-called Ranorex test suite project. So a regular project which has a test suite is a test suite project. And the intention is, just as we know it, to keep a test suite and a test case structure. But on the other hand, we have a so-called Ranorex module library project, which is a project only with the only intention to, and let's click on that. This project is used to create a reusable class library that can be referenced and used by other Ranorex test suite projects. So I have one project here only with the only purpose of having a library of recording and code modules. And what about them now? So I could close this here and step back to the downloads folder. Let me make and create a very small project to show you what the intention is here. One question I had, is it possible to share a repository items and module library on Git? Yes, of course, this is possible because Ranorex seamlessly also integrates into all kinds of CI systems. And the basis to do that is to share files, source files, and repository items and module libraries are source files in this way across GitHub or any other source or revision control system. So let's create a new blank solution. I call it my test. It's not a big deal, and I place it into the downloads folder and say okay. It's just a very simple, nothing to do, but I want to show you now how to include such a module library project. And I could do this in two different ways. The first way is I simply click on the solution, I right click it, and I add a new existing project. And once I do this, I could simply step into my downloads folder, into the demo app master, into the demo app master library, and select this library, module library project. And what happens then is that this library project is linked to my solution. So I have a linked module library project and can make use of all of the, I click open, and now I have it here, and I have access to my complete set of created recording and code modules. Even within the module browser, I have it now here, and I simply could create any kind of test case out of this. So I could start the demo application, put it over here, and do whatever I want to do. And within, after the module library, you see here where it has its origin. So it has its origin in the demo app master library project. But as you can see, it's my test here. It's the project here. As you could see, it is not copied into my project here. So there is no repository, master library repository here. It's only linked here from outside, still from the demo app master library project. So it's linked from here. And I have another way of doing that. I could simply copy it. So what I could do is I simply copy the complete library project here and copy it into my test structure in here. And then if I do the same, I reference to my copied library. So you could decide to link or copy it. That's a very mighty way of sharing a module, a complete module library. So let me see what we have done so far. I need to stick to my agenda here. Yes, now we are about to dive a little bit deeper into some guiding principles of professional test structures. And yeah, we still have some 25 minutes to go. So this is, we are quite good in time. So let me open up. Although layout C is not my recommended layout, I use this here to show you some do's and don'ts within a test case structure. So let me first, let me first show you some recommendations and then show you them within the test suite. What comes now is a set of recommendations which come out of our project reviews. So some of them seem to be very, very easy, possibly too easy, but I can tell you it's not the usual way that they are done. So one recommendation is rename every test container and don't use empty test containers or disabled actions. What does this mean? What does this mean? You should, if you create a new test case here, so if I create a new, add a new test case, then it always has the name test case number 1, 2, whatever. And many of our users simply leave it that way. So you should always give test containers like smart folders or test cases meaningful names. So give meaningful names to recording modules. If you have recording modules within a test run here, you could disable them for the sake of somehow debugging. So you could try out the test run without one, have an alternative one, and so on and so forth. But at the end, you never ever should leave some disabled recording modules, or even worse, if you have empty test cases, empty smart folders which are left from the creation process, delete them. Don't leave them within the test case. There's one question. If I add a new recording in the linked project, would it be directly added to the main project? Yes, this is the concept of linking. So if you add a new recording module, if you add even a new repository item to a linked project library, then it is immediately available in all the other projects which link to this module. The problem might be that you need some kind of tough organization behind, else you easily and very quickly receive an unmanageable set of modules. So this is the bad information behind that. And another question, does linking a module library from another solution uses the repository of that solution for that module? Oops, reading this question is already a difficult task. But yes, the answer is if you really link it, then it's using the other's solution module library, so or repository. So linking means linking. Linking means you only have it physically stored once, and then you reuse it and reference to this from another point. It's the same as with files in a folder. So coming back to my recommendations, always, and this is it's not a rule, but it's a recommendation. Always start with a test case in a test suite. It's possible to, of course, add a smart folder as the first step within your test suite. And unless you need not do that, don't do it. Test cases are a regular way, a recommended way to start a test case. And only use smart folders to further create a substructure. So use smart folder to further create substructures and not test cases. Test cases, another recommendation is that test cases should be as self-independent as possible. So one test case should not depend on another test case. Test cases are a way to implement one independent test purpose, and therefore they should be as much independent as they can. And last but not least, make use of setup and teardown sections. So use setup sections to prepare a test case. So for example, here we have the functional application tests, and in the setup there's one common action. It's starting up the application under test. And then we have one test case which tests one part of this application with one data set. So it's the introduction functional test for one data set. And in the setup, we simply verify that the correct program part has been selected. And now this test can be executed. Finally, the data is reset, and at the end, the application is closed. So this is a self-contained test case which does not base on any other test case in this test suite. These are the first set. Another set of recommendation, or another important recommendation, is every test case needs to have a validation. Testing is about validating something. And if you have a test case without a validation, it's a useless test case. So you could have, of course, substructures like a smart folder where the insertion of data has been performed. And this substructure is really does not need any validation, for example. But the test case itself has a validation. So at any point of this test case, there needs to be a validation. If you have test cases without validation, it's useless. Another recommendation is try to prevent deeply nested test structures. So try to keep it in a low, what is a low number? So what we sometimes have, we have nested test cases with up to 10 or 15 levels there. And I can tell you, this is not simple and this is not manageable. And you could design it in another way. So always try to keep it in the number 4. So we have the test suite as the first structure, then we have the test case as the second, and then we have 2, maximum 3 more test container levels down below. If it exceeds the number 4 or 5, then you will see that it is not manageable anymore. Always try to use run configurations. So if you have a number of different test cases and substructures, then you run in danger that some of these test containers, like this one here, so for example, you have one test container here and it's not selected. And sometimes you are in danger that with no run configuration, this one is selected. So if I have here the DBN, then it should be selected, but it is not. So there's some kind of mistake here. So, oh, DBN, DB1, where's DB1? Here. Now it's selected here. So you should verify that at least every test container, every smart folder, every test case is at least used once and not left out without any purpose anymore. And always try to use the test sequences and run configurations. We often see a lot of test case logic in there without any run configuration. So they manually need to check and uncheck test cases, and this is prone to error. So obviously use run configurations. Another thing is data binding. So data binding is a very nice thing. Let me find something where I can explain this to you in more detail. So yes, let's do it here. So for instance, here we have a database testing. So we would like to test of our demo application of our application here. Where do we have it? Here. We have a test database and we would like to test if we can fill in the data here and if the counter works correctly and so on, and if we can delete it and so on and so forth. So this is done not on a fixed set of data, it's based on a data set. And where do we place this data set? So we have different opportunities. You could define the data set in the test case itself. You could define it there in the insert data smart folder, or you could define it down there in the smart folder where directly the insertion has been done. And a good advice is to always do it as close as possible. So if you use the data set in here, then do the data binding as close as possible in the hosting smart folder. So here, if I right click and open the data source, I have my defined data set here. It's always as close as possible. Even here, I have the validation here. I have here a parameterized validation, which obviously needs one variable. Where do I do the data binding? As close as possible, here in the validate counter. Here, there's done the data binding for this validation. Always as close as possible. Yeah, and if you use variables, never ever, you have the manage variables button up here. You can open that. And you should obey that you don't have variables which are not used, and always use variables with default values. Variables should be named correctly, they should have a default value, and they should be used and not left unused here. So these are the most important do's and don'ts. Let me see. Yeah, there's one more thing in here. And one more thing is, we are very often confronted with conditions. So smart folders and test cases can be bound to conditions. So you could define, for instance, I right click it here and define a condition. So you can define the test run based upon some data source or parameter and run this test container only based on this condition. We know this is possible and we know we offer conditions, but I can tell you almost any test requirement which is based on a condition could be prevented. So you should try to implement the test case logic into some kind of run configuration or separated test runs rather than to conditions. If you tend to implement conditions and nested conditions, I can surely tell you this will lead into a disaster. So conditions are not a good way of implementing a test case logic. So this brings me, all of this will be reported in our user guide. So you can, of course, recap this in our user guide. But for the moment, I need to step on. We still have some 12, 13 minutes to go. And I would like to step into the last part, which is quite as important as the other ones before, and have a look on smart reporting and documentation. What do I mean by this? So let's run a test here. So let's run the smoke test. So let's go for the smoke test. I run a complete smoke test here and I run it. Oops, let's close the application. And it only takes a couple of seconds. It doesn't matter exactly what happens here. I want to show you based on the report. So this is what I would like to show you. Just a second. The smoke test checks if the application is installed well and if it can be started and stopped again. So finally, we are ending up here with a report, hopefully in a green pie chart. Yes, here we can see 2 test cases have been successfully executed. And this might be a report which you happen to see. So it's a report, a standard Ranorex report. And I would like to show you right in a second now a different report. And then you can tell yourself or imagine yourself what I'm meaning. So one image is worth 1,000 words. And this is what I would like to show you now. I have a prepared different test solution, and I do the same test right now with this solution and show you the difference in the reporting. So when it comes to the smoke test, I run it. And then let's see what the report tells us. So here we go. The test execution begins. It does almost the same. We don't know yet what it does. So imagine you're part of a team and you receive this report, which I have given you before. And then imagine I hand over you the report, which we have now here. So the test is about to be finished very soon. And yeah, this is the report. Now, let's see what makes the difference. First of all, this report contains a rather nice description here. So it contains a description what happens during the smoke test and what are the parts of the smoke test. And even if I step into here, into the first test here, it explains me what this test is about. So what is the basis for the test success? What is the basis for the failure? And what is the testing method? And if I open up it, I could even read more here. I could see here, okay, now we have a method here from the automation helpers which checks the files. And what is done internally here? Sometimes it's necessary not only to explain what happens, but to use an image and to make you see what happens within this test case. So this is kind of a much better improved report here. And even if you step inside, you could make use of screenshots here or other explanations, user-defined explanations of what happens within the report here. And this is something which I would like to point out. And I can tell you from all of our, if we have 100% of project reviews, 99% do not use any documentation or commenting within their test solutions. And this is something which I would like to show you. So if you have a test suite and you use your description field here and you double click it, then there is an editor opened up and you could almost do anything in here. You could write the text, you can format the text. You have access to HTML format here. You could link something in here. You could insert a link, you could insert an image. You can format it in almost any type of way you would like to do this. That's the same for the test cases. So test cases are also defined the same way here. So you could even, I have it here, you could even insert images here which you have prepared to make the test cases more understandable or better understandable. Even if it comes to the recording modules themselves, you could report into log files. So you can write your own defined messages into log files. You can write screenshots. You can place screenshots in the log files. You can place images there. You can write the values of variables in there. So you could do everything in there just to make a report better understandable for others who need to read and interpret this report. So when I come to, I don't know if I have done this with the, yeah, that's the sanity testing too. So when it comes to sanity testing, I guess I have done the same here, yes. So for example, if I check, oh, I don't have it here. Let me see. Yeah, we validate the version here. So this is something where I really use a screenshot and some text. And if you run this test, then let's make the sanity test here and see the version tests. Then it's a very nice example of showing what is really validated. So printing just the validation is a success is good as long as the validation is a success. But right in the moment you have a failure and a failure pops up, then you're really stuck with that information. Oh, I'm sorry, I failed. And as the more information you have inside of your report, then the quicker you are able to fix it. So this is a good advice and a best practice when doing tests. It's not only structuring tests, it's also how to implement them. And if I have the validation here, you could see here, I describe what is the purpose of this test. And even if I have my validation there, then I show within the report what has been validated. And then you could see where the mistake is. Maybe there's a failure in reading out this part of the validation, or maybe it's just simple, it's a wrong version of this program. So these are things which can or definitely will improve the quality of your test solution. Where you will find all of this. First of all, you could download the sample solution from ranorex.com/rxmeta/blah blah blah, and then it's rxdemoapp.testing.zip. And as I already told you, there will be or there is a user guide chapter with everything I showed you today. What is to be expected for you next? First of all, you will receive a follow-up email with the on-demand video link. You need to give me, let's say, 1 or 1.5 hours to do some cosmetics on the video itself, and then I will put it into the mail, and it will go out definitely by today, and you will receive a follow-up email with the on-demand video link. You can watch this for free as many times as you want to. There's no expiration date. You could share it with colleagues and friends. And what is much more important, you can ask me. So whenever you have a question to that, send me a mail to webinar@ranorex.com, and everybody who knows me knows that we will answer every single question. So reach out to webinar@ranorex.com, and I'll be here for you. My name is Andreas. It really was a pleasure to be here today. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope you enjoyed it. And I'm looking forward to see you again in one of our upcoming webinars. For today, I wish you a great day. Thank you very much and goodbye.